Right, let's get this show on the road. Hello, and welcome to This Week in Space. I'm your host with the most, Joan Emerson Bell, or Blind Stallion Space Wizard, depending on which platform you are catching me on. Sorry that this is coming out a little later than usual. I like to do this on Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. But I'm on vacation, so things got a little screwy. And I'm glad that I could get this done because it's pretty full on and intense week in space, and I've done a lot of research. I've been thinking about it. I've been living through it, and so I just wanted to share some of my findings with y'all. So thanks for joining me here. If you missed this on the Instagram, it's always in my feed, and then also I posted on YouTube. The name of my channel is Camp Wizard Camp, and you can check it out there. I don't know, like and subscribe. That's what everybody says. So if you do that, I think that's just what people do. I don't really understand how anything works, but I'm just along for the ride. So thanks for tuning in and rolling with me through this week in space. And also thank you for being flexible and not totally forgetting about me as I'm trying to navigate my vacation and taking a little time off as I move through my own sort of relationship with space. All right. Anywho, let's get to what's going on. Like I was saying, this is a pretty intense week in space. Kind of starts off with a lot of tension going on. We have cardinal T square in the going on between the Sun in Libra, Chiron in Aries, and Mars in Cancer. We have the Sun in Libra, Chiron, and Aries opposing each other on Sunday the 13th. Mars in Cancer squaring Chiron, which was exact at 21 degrees and 15 arc minutes. Also on the 13th. And then on Monday, the 14th, the Sun in Libra came in to perfect their square with Mars and Aries. So what does this mean? This means we get a lot of tension. We have the Sun, which is kind of our identity, our sense of self over there in Libra, which is cardinal air sign, trying to like weigh both sides of the issue, trying to find out what my needs are in relation to other people's needs, how we can work together, how we can be really diplomatic. And then across the zodiac, we have Chiron, which is the wounded healer and an archetype of the core wound in the system, right? So on one hand, we have like this is me in relationship to you, and this is us, and this is how things are working, and like keeping the vibe good. Across the zodiac, we have that part of ourselves that's like, oh my God, I'm not getting my needs met. And I've never gotten my needs met. And this feels terrible, right? But with people, and I got to make sure everybody else is cool. And this is how, I stay happy, knowing that you're happy. And Chiron's being like, oh my God, I just want that thing that I want. I just want to eat candy, right? But like, I'm with this person who doesn't eat candy. So I guess we're not having candy. And then we have Mars squaring all of this. Mars in Cancer, where Mars is in their fall, right? And so we have Mars with kind of like some frustrated desires, having some feelings about that. And we can think about Mars in Cancer as like bubbling, boiling over, pots boiling over, boiling water. We can also think about Mars in Cancer as like the shell and the claws of the crab, which is like nothing bothers me, right? But like don't get too close, right? Mars in Cancer is a protector, right? So when we have Mars in Cancer squaring off with Chiron in Aries, we have this sort of like wounded place that like develops the shell and develops the claws and is like, no one's ever getting close to this, right? And then we have the Sun all the way across the zodiac, also in this T square, which is like, I got to make sure everybody else is good, right? And we can get this like kind of self abandoning, we can get the kind of contorting, letting go of what we think we need because like I'm good, I've got like my shell, I've got my claw, like I'm not letting anyone close to me. So like I'm gonna make sure that everybody else is good and like I'll figure out my shit later, right? And I don't know how effective this is in the long term or in the long run because what T square brings is a lot of tension, right? And all of this tension wants to boil over, and that tension needs to find a release. And so, this is sort of how we are coming into the week, right? Is with all of this tension between like that Sun in Libra, which is like, I want to find balance between me and you, right? Mars in Cancer, that is harboring these feelings about being vulnerable, right? Chiron in Aries, which is like, I never get what I want, right? But like, it's not safe to ask. And Mars being like, oh my God, like if something doesn't change, I'm going to explode and I'm going to like lash out. Right. And so, one of the ways to think about the planets as these are all kind of like characters in our show. These are all parts of us that are becoming activated, right? And all like in a tense aspect, like a T square, it's like, these are all at cross purposes, right? The Chiron in Aries like has their needs, which is like, I'm hurt, right? And I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met. We have the Sun in Libra, which is doing their thing, which is like, I need to make sure everybody else is good and like the vibe is high. And then Mars in Cancer, right? That part of us that is like, I can't let anybody close and I can't actually tell you what my needs are because I'm so afraid that they're not going to get met. So whatever, right? You're just cut off anytime you try and get close to me. And so, how do we navigate this tension? How do we like reconcile the sort of tension between all of these players and all of these characters? And I think what we get throughout the week is this tension building because this is all in full effect during the full moon, which I believe is happening on Thursday, the 17th, right? So this is all kind of like bubbling and boiling and toiling and troubling until we get the full moon in Aries, which this T square is a big player in, right? And the full moon is like things coming to culmination. It is the sort of emotional tension rising so that we can see clearly, oh, this is actually what's going on and like something needs to shift and I need to discard something, right? This is too much energy. What needs to be released? What needs to be let go of? What can we move through, right? And take the lessons from this month, from this experience, from this kind of culminating point, and then take those lessons and like start to release some of the other baggage that isn't really serving us. And so that's the week that we're in. This is what's happening, and this is what we're rolling along with. And so on and we're working up to that, right? And I have some serious thoughts about this full moon, which I'll get to in a second by the time we get to Thursday. But we're going to start on Monday the 14th. We have Venus in Scorpio opposing Uranus in Taurus. This is going down at 26 degrees and 31 arc minutes of these fixed signs. So in an opposition, we have two planets that are opposing each other on opposite sides of the zodiac. And these are both in fixed signs, and fixed signs tend to be really stubborn, right? So, Venus is over there being like, this is what I want, this is what I need. And Uranus is like, this is what I want, this is what I need. And there's sort of, this tension between each other and this kind of stare down, right? And so Venus in Scorpio is having a big week. Venus in general is having a big week. They're making a bunch of aspects, and then they're at the end of the week, right after the full moon, they're moving into Sagittarius, which is a great thing because Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, which means that they have a much harder time getting their needs met. And I've talked about this for the past couple of weeks, but Venus in Scorpio wants to dig deep, wants to know things from the inside out, right? And sometimes there is not that depth available, so Venus can feel very frustrated, right? Uranus is the planet of upheaval and sudden change, right? Uranus like flips the table unexpectedly. Uranus brings us to breakthroughs, which usually come through breakdowns. So when there's this moment of frustration being like, I'm not getting my scorpionic needs met right now, right? Something shifts, something changes. Uranus kind of comes online, right? Especially with this opposition, like blows things up in order for Venus to find relationships that are better suited for them and where they're at and where they're trying to go, right? And I think Venus in Scorpio is looking for deep connection in situations where it's safe enough to be vulnerable to love and be loved, right? And what we get out of this is the ability to dig deep into our values and what brings us pleasure. And Uranus is the desire to move towards our idealized vision of relationship. And by relationship, that can be an intimate partnership, right? But it can also be friendship, right? Our communities, the people that we interact with and are in relationship with. right? So this Uranus Venus opposition can bring unexpected changes in relationship and also in our values, what we find beautiful and pleasing, right? This can also bring in unexpected love affairs or, love interactions and entanglements that break up existing relationships, right? Because Uranus wants change, Uranus wants liberation. And sometimes it'll be like, cool, like this is happening now, right? In order to get freedom, in order to move towards the Uranian ideal, right, of liberation and authenticity, which, the way that I have found Uranus to operate is not the most delicate, right? It is not the most kind of kind planet. It's sort of like at a distance. It's an outer planet beyond the Saturnian limits, and Uranus is like, oh, that needs to change, like zap, right? And just creates the conditions for change to occur in ways that are maybe not super sensitive, right? And we know when we have these Uranian feelings, right? This like, I've got to do something. I'm jumping out of my skin. Something's got to change. And then we end up doing something that kind of catalyzes that change that is maybe not the nicest, kindest, or most delicate thing, and sometimes that's what we need to get free. Right. And Uranus with Venus can bring this in the relational sphere. Right. Which, it is what it is. And we want to, be kind to each other, and we want to show up with compassion and, understanding. And also, sometimes Uranus blows things up, and then we are picking up the pieces, which can be really painful and difficult. But the ideal, and Uranus is moving towards that ideal, as a sky god, right? It's to bring us towards the ideal of our values, our relationships, right? How we want to be in connection with other people and ultimately ourselves. Also, fun fact, Uranus is sort of the progenitor of Venus, because it is through the castration of Uranus by Kronos that Venus is born. It is Uranus's bits and bobs that get tossed into the ocean after he's castrated, that foam and bubble, and Venus, Aphrodite, emerges from that. So there's this interesting relationship between like the sort of explosion, eruption, kind of evacuation of Uranus and Venus, and which is the archetype of love, beauty, connection, right? So it is through these kind of like disruptive, violent occurrences that also we find deeper connection, that we find love and beauty. I think that I just want to check my notes. Yeah, and I think that the Uranian influence in a Venusian transit can bring up a lot of instability and upheaval, right? But the radical nature of Uranus might help us to get in touch with things that actually bring us pleasure and maybe have felt inaccessible, especially with Venus in Scorpio. And Scorpio is a sign of taboo and depth, right? So Venus might not have felt that there was the level of connection or communication or, interaction that they were seeking for, that they found pleasurable, or there were taboos that were preventing them from being in touch with themselves, being in touch with partners, right? Being in touch with the pleasure principle. And the Uranian sort of opposition is like, what are you doing, right? Let's blow this up, right? You need to sort of move through that so that you can be happy. And so that this can be really helpful in those ways, but there is a lot of instability in which that sort of Venusian energy has to go through in order to get in touch with themselves and what brings authentic delight and pleasure, right? Okay, so on Tuesday, October 14th, Venus moves from this tense opposition with Uranus into a nice harmonious trine with Neptune in Pisces. And this is happening again, Tuesday, October the 14th, which is today. Turns out that today's the 14th? 14th? Today the 14th? I don't know. Maybe I have it all wrong. Whatever Tuesday is, Yeah, this is what happens when I go on vacation. I just like lose all sense of time. Yeah, Tuesday, October 15th. Thank you very much. Uh, we have Venus in Scorpio trining Neptune in Pisces. This is happening at 27 degrees and 51 arc minutes of these water signs. So this is a water trine. We get easy flow of emotional energy, which is great because Venus is moving off this kind of like disruption from the opposition to Uranus. And now, having a bunch of like upheaval and feelings, and then there's a kind of like more free flow of that emotional information that occurs when Venus trines Neptune. So in evolutionary astrology, Neptune is seen as the higher vibration of Venus, and I'm not necessarily into this idea of like hierarchy, like higher and lower, better or worse, right? But we can think about Neptune as the universal love, the love of everything, the sort of all-encompassing energy of love and connection, right? And that sort of connective principle that holds things together. Venus, we can think about as interpersonal love, right? The way that we embody the universal ideal of love through our interactions with each other, with the objects that we like, the things that we like, the things that we like to do, the stuff that brings us joy, right? And as we engage in these and as we engage in relationships that feel loving, we are able to sort of embody that universal principle of love that Neptune represents, right? So I think that through the experience of Venusian love, right, and our relationship to ourselves and to other things, we also are able to, tap into something bigger, and it teaches us about the principles of love and the attractive principle of the universe. And so we have Venus coming off this potentially radical realization of that the Uranus-Venus opposition brought, and this can bring deeper understandings of the connections that we seek to have in the idealized relationships that we want to have, and help us to move into a sense of connection with the feelings, right, and the things that feel more fulfilling. Um, the harmonious sorry so Venus's opposition to Uranus also brought up like creativity, right, and new ways of engaging with inspiration. And then the Neptune trine is a really good way of tuning into that creativity, allowing our imagination to sort of bolster the creative experience or these new ideas, right? The Uranian like kind of inspiration moving through us, and then Neptune's imagination allowing us to follow that sense of inspiration and tap into our creativity. So I think that this is a great week to allow inspiration, whatever that means for you, whatever that looks like for you, and to follow the threads of creativity wherever they bring you. Good time for daydreaming, for reading and writing poetry, especially love poetry, which Venus loves. And I think Neptune also really appreciates, especially like love poetry to the divine. Really good time for engaging in devotional practice, painting, dancing, things that inspire ecstasy. Right. And I think that this Venus opposition to Uranus and then trine to Neptune is a great recipe for ecstatic experience, right? Breaking out of the normal routines that's Venus and Uranus and into the awareness of the divine. And so cultivating experience of ecstasy, right? An ecstatic experience. And so to think about like what are the ways that we can cultivate and utilize the ecstatic feelings in productive ways, right? Because I think a lot of the energy around this week and around this full moon is about like, oh, I need to like break out, right? And I have like a sense of like werewolf energy coming up with this full moon, which I'm gonna break down in a minute. But the feeling of like, oh, I need to like change. I need to like have this sort of big animal experience or big ecstatic experience, right? So thinking about what are the ways that we can meet that? What are the ways that we can welcome that in healthy and productive ways so it doesn't just overtake us, right? Which, sometimes it'd be like that, right? And, looking at astrology, it's like, oh, it's going to be like this. This is what we can do with this. This is the best way that I think that we can deal with this. And sometimes it's just like, no, we just get straight hijacked and like things go to shit and we pick up the pieces. And sometimes that's the most healthy expression of it rather than trying to manage our experiences. Because sometimes trying to manage our experiences and make them go like healthy or good, like is not really the most helpful, right? Because it's just trying to repress things that need to move through us. But, I think the ideal or my ideal is being able to create channels, right? Things that we can do to experience these feelings and to help them carry us to where we want to be instead of getting hijacked and derailed by them. So, just something to think about this week. So, Thursday, October the 17th, now I'm all confused, but I'm going to say that Thursday would be the 17th. We get the full moon in Aries. Yeah, like days, hours, time zones, like everything's kind of slipping away. But that's the week that I'm having, you know? And maybe that's like my response to the like Uranian and Neptunian energy is just being like, I don't even know anymore. So Thursday, October the 17th, question mark, we get this full moon in Aries at 24 degrees and 35 arc minutes. We have the sun at 24 degrees, 35 arc minutes of Libra, which means the moon is at 24 degrees and 35 arc minutes of Aries because a full moon is in opposition of the sun and the moon. And we also have the moon conjunct Chiron, who's at 21 degrees of Aries. And then it's the sun and moon will be squaring Mars in Cancer at 22 degrees of Cancer, and then in sort of a wide square to Pluto, who is just stationed direct at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So a lot of tension, a lot of stuff coming up. And we sort of talked about the Sun, Mars, Chiron dynamic as at the first part of the broadcast, as this was exact over Sunday and Monday. But I think a lot of this energy is building to culmination around this full moon. And like I was saying, I've been thinking about this full moon in terms of the werewolf, the archetype of the werewolf, which is maybe one of my favorite spooky creatures, I have to say. And I feel a kinship with, that beast, being, animal, cryptid. Is that what they are? Cryptid zoology animal. Um, the How do I want to start this? So, well, let's just dive in. The first I think one of the first accounts that I found of the werewolf, right? I think there's a theme in Gilgamesh, which I have not gone back to read this week. But there's also the werewolf appears in ancient Greece as King Lycaon. So the story goes a little something like this. Zeus heard of evil times on Earth, so he descended as a mortal and went to investigate. After witnessing a bunch of heinous shit on Earth, Zeus visited Lycaon's kingdom in the disguise of a laborer. Zeus wandered through the kingdom, and signs of Zeus's divinity started to show through his disguise, and the populace started worshiping this random laborer who just shows up in town. Lycaon, who's the king, gets offended and decides to test whether this visitor is actually a divine god. And so the king and his sons arrange for a banquet to which Zeus was invited. For this banquet, Lycaon has one of his kids killed and has their body roasted, and he serves this to Zeus. Zeus is so offended. Zeus is like, "What are you doing? This is disgusting. You are a monster." Right? And overturns the table and has his vengeance upon Lycaon and his sons. He strikes down all of his kids with lightning bolts, and Lycaon runs away from the palace and is transformed into a wolf by Zeus. And so this leads to the belief that Lycaon was the first werewolf, which gives us the term lycans, right? The lycans are the race of werewolves. And another telling of the story, Lycaon and all of his sons were turned into wolves, being the first lycanthropes. So this is the origin of the modern werewolf. And like Han's moral behavior is what causes his transformation from human to animal, right? It is this testing of the gods, and also in Greek culture, hospitality is incredibly important because they are traveling people. And so, if you are a traveling people, you need people to extend hospitality because if you don't, like traveling doesn't function. And so it's also really important that each individual person extends hospitality to people who travel. And if you are traveling and somebody like serves you human flesh, like trying to trick you, like that's messed up, right? And Zeus is not having it. And so this is not only like Han pulling some ratchet shit, right, and trying to trick Zeus, but also it's he betrays the code of hospitality by trying to trick one of his guests and shows himself to be like less than human, right? That his kind of like greed for power and need to be right and his like testing of the limits of divinity and mortality are really offensive, and so that puts him in the place of being transformed into this werewolf, right? And so werewolves are monsters that relate to deeper fears and anxieties that emerge from the depths of our unconscious, and also I think like deep survival needs. Right, and this is kind of moving from like Heian into modern werewolf ideas, right? The deep survival needs and also the kind of animalistic urges to procreate, to feed, right, to be free. And these are all these kind of unconscious urges which are suppressed by the ego identity to keep us in social relationship with each other, right? And when we are overwhelmed by subconscious forces and these basic survival impulses that supersede the rational mind, they hijack our system. Right? And the idea of animal power overrides our pro-social impulses. And so, one of the ways that we can think about werewolves is as the id function. And according to Sigmund Freud, Uncle Siggy, the id represents the primitive part of our mind, the part motivated by the pleasure principle, especially the sexual drives, which must in turn be tamed by the ego civilization building reality principle. Right. And so I'm bringing this in because during this full moon, we have these key ingredients in the trans, or I'm bringing this in because the full moon is a key ingredient in the transformation into a werewolf. And this is also kind of moving into Scorpio season, moving towards Halloween, right? It's werewolf time. Oh, right. Um, we also have the full moon in Aries, which is a Mars ruled sign, conjunct Chiron, which could be seen as the werewolf's bite, that initial wound, which transformed the civilized human into a beast, right? And we can think about our core wounding as this thing that when it gets activated, we kind of lose our decorum and our dignity, right? All of these Libra, like social functions where it's like, I really care what you think. Oh, you like that? Oh, but I really like your thing, right? When that core wound gets activated, and we feel a sense of abandonment, when we feel a sense of loss, when like old traumas get triggered, like all that goes out of the window and we disassociate, we go into like survival impulses, right? We sort of only care about our needs and are reacting from a kind of activated or traumatized place, right? Which we can think about as that like werewolf tapping into the survival instinct, right? Um, yeah, and so we have Mars squaring all of this and wanting to take action, right? However, Mars' desires and appetites are maybe suppressed in order for the sun to function in the polite society of Libra. So we have all of this tension, right? The werewolf's bite and the wound, right? That is like, oh, like something's wrong, right? Libra, which is the ego, or the sun in Libra, the ego function being like, no, just keep it together, man, right? Like we just got to make it through this dinner party. And then we have Mars in Cancer, which is trying to protect that wound and also has these drives and desires, which is like, yo, I have appetites and like things need to happen, right? And so all of this tension, then we throw Pluto in the mix, who's also squaring this whole Gordian knot of experience. And Pluto is that all of that repressed kind of shadow, right? Where all of that frustrated desire, where all of that fear and all of the survival instincts gets shoved away so we can make it through the rest of the dinner party, right? So Freud described the id as the dark inaccessible part of our personality, right? And this is Pluto in a nutshell, right? This is Pluto is like where we kind of shove everything that is unacceptable and put it all into the shadow of Pluto, where society is like, you can't do that, you can't think that, you can't say that. And so it's like, okay, just like that goes in with the Pluto, that goes in the box marked Pluto, right? During this full moon, we also have Venus and Scorpio in a sextile, a communicative, harmonious aspect with Pluto, which is, Venus and Scorpio is, like I said, digging deep into the depths of our relationships and our desires, right? Scorpio also deals with taboo, the types of pleasure and behaviors that are unacceptable and which are acceptable, right? And, all that unacceptable pleasure and desire goes into the Pluto box, right? So Pluto is the shadow where everything unacceptable is exiled to. It is our survival needs and everything that we don't have the capacity to hold in our conscious mind, right? And so this becomes the sort of Jungian shadow or the Freudian id, right? And the id is this primitive, unconscious part of our personality. It's a reservoir for instinctual energy driven by the pleasure principle, which is like, I need my needs met now. I'm hungry, I want food. I'm thirsty, I want water. I want to do this, I want to do that, right? All of these sort of survival needs that we are kind of socialized through society and culture to repress or not to need or to negotiate in societally pro-social ways, right? Right. So the ego is the conscious and realistic part of the personality. It acts as the director and kind of managing the needs of the id, along with the desires of the superego and reality. And so what we have here is this sort of Libran scales, right? Of the sun in Libra being like, well, the id's really hungry, but it's not dinner time, and so it'd be very rude if I started eating right now. So we're like trying to navigate and balance these things. Anyway, I'm bringing this all in because the factors in this moon look like there's the animal part or id part of the self that needs some airtime, right? That kind of id, those suppressed desires, want to come out, right? So how are we able to honor our animal selves and our instinctual desire and our intuitive knowing without being totally overwhelmed, right? Because we have this Mars in Cancer, which is like desire and like anger and frustration boiling over. We have Pluto stationing direct in Capricorn, which is sort of like digging up the last dregs of that Capricorn energy and the sort of like last shadowy material in Capricorn, right? We have the sun, which is like trying to put on a good face and make sure everybody's good, right? And then we have Chiron, who's conjunct the moon, right? And he is a centaur, half human, half animal. And his whole life is about learning how to balance the experience of the animal and human self, right? So one doesn't supersede the other. So there's just like a lot of energy that's sort of bubbling, and I think that like all of these unseen and suppressed parts are really wanting to come out in some way, right? And so the reason that I'm talking about all this is I think that being able to acknowledge them and being like, yo, what does that animal part of me need or want, right? How can I honor that? How can I care for that instead of continuing to like suppress it or tell it it's bad or tell it it's wrong or say like that is not possible. And I think that part of the Chiron wound or Chiron's wound getting hit with the arrow of the Hydra poison happens in his leg, in his animal part, right? And so our connection to the earth, our connection to the animal body, the connection to our instincts, right? And when we think about werewolf, right, we think about person like tearing off their clothes, running naked through through the woods, and waking up in the zoo. I just watched American Werewolf in London last night, so I have like a lot of vivid imagery, right? But we think of this person who is like totally unbound by society, goes into a killing frenzy, can't remember what they're doing, can't remember who they harmed, what they broke, wakes up naked, totally unacceptable, right? All this unacceptable behavior. And maybe it doesn't need to be like that. Maybe that is like the greatest societal fear of like tapping into that animalistic energy, right? Or the fear that we will harm somebody close to us, or the fear that we will do something that breaks all of these taboos, as in the case of Lycaon and serving one of his kids to a god, right? Making the sacrifice in a really horrific way. And maybe it doesn't need to be like that. right? Maybe tapping into that animal part of ourselves is just tuning into our intuition, right? Listening to our hungers, listening to our appetites, listening to our desires. And if we give these things an audience, I don't think that they overwhelm us, right? I don't think that we like turn into, a total depraved lunatic, right? I think that being able to honor the animal self and our connection to the earth and to the animate world is actually incredibly healthy, right? And to think about the ways that it feels right to do that, the ways that it feels right to honor our desires and to honor our instincts and to honor our intuitions and to honor, the hungers that we have. And so, you know, yeah, and I think that to suppress this animal part and to cut ourselves off from intuition and connection with nature is like pretty unhealthy. And one of the ways that Lycan is talked about in some of the stuff that I read was the protector turned tyrant, right? Which I think is a really interesting thing to think about, right? You can think about the protector turned tyrant as the hyper vigilant part of ourself that's like, what are they going to think? Right? Protecting. And this is maybe a very Mars and Cancer thing, right? I need to protect this. I need to protect myself. I need to protect this wound. But where that goes from, a healthy boundary or like a healthy sense of protection into like a hypervigilance and a repression and a shutdown, right? Because if we're constantly protecting that wounded place, how is it ever going to heal? Right? It needs air. It needs air. Right? It needs to be looked at. It needs to be tended. And I think that like that wounded place is, really activated during this full moon because Chiron is conjunct the moon. And so like all of this is kind of coming to a culmination. And, that protector instinct might be like, no, shove it down, push it away. I can't do that. I can't feel that. Right. I can't express that. I can't eat that. Right. And trying to find ways that we are able to touch into them, that we're able to look into those difficult places, that we are able to honor our instinctual knowing and that healing wisdom that we all have encoded in our bodies, right? And I think that, the protector turned tyrant can be like that hypervigilance, which gives way to rage. Right. And I think one of the things that's happening in the collective is there is a hypervigilance, and for good reason, right? Because things are really intense, right? And things feel very shaky and unstable. But that hypervigilance also like keeps us looking for an enemy, right? Something that like that's the problem, right? Or like that's the person who's against me. This is the reason that this thing is the way that it is, right? And so that hypervigilance keeps us always sort of scanning on the outside for danger and threat and for enemy, right? Which is great because it's also when we get to project that onto somebody else. But being able to sit with like what's coming up with me, what's coming up in me, can be a lot harder, right? And so I think the astrology of this full moon looks to me a lot like a recipe for transformation. And the question is, what is the transformation going to look like? And I think we can kind of consider this for ourselves. And um, the Bad Pastor, Lindsay Turner, who I love their work. I'm going to be doing a 4-part talk with them on exorcism and spirit possession at the end of the month. I'll put links and stuff and talk about that after. But Lindsay sent me this quote from Guillermo del Toro the other day, and I think that this is perfect for this full moon. Since childhood, I've been faithful to monsters. Have been aged and absolved by them because monsters, I believe, are patron saints of our blissful imperfections, and they allow and embody the possibility of failing, right? And I think that failure is such a great Chiron word. And I think a lot of our wounds come from perceived failures. I'm not good enough, right? That person's better than me. This didn't work out. This didn't go how I wanted it. So I must be bad, right? Like we have a failure and then we develop a story around that and then we internalize that story and that story festers in our wound, right? But how do we embrace the monstrous and the imperfections and allow failure as adaptations, because it's when things don't go according to plan, it's when our expectations aren't met that we are able to grow in amazing ways and realize, oh, I wanted to do that, that didn't work, maybe that isn't the right thing for me. How do I adapt and change around that, right? How do I not hold on to that story that I am bad, right, that I am wrong, that I am a failure, but things didn't work out the way that I had hoped? And failures provide an opening in the perfection and kind of like solar consciousness that allows for change and transformation to occur. It is the sort of fly in the ointment. It is the break in the facade where things can be different. Right? When it's always perfect, it's really hard to change. And I think that the monstrous and the chironic, right, and Chiron being a centaur is kind of monstrous, right? It is a chimera, which are monsters, right? Half human, half animal, right? Which is not perfect, right? It is not that the Apollo, right, who is the solar deity, who is like the golden boy, and Chiron is sort of this like weird, wise centaur creature, right? Which like allows for change and growth to occur. Um, and I think that the path to growth begins in the monstrous, in the shadow, in the wound. And that doesn't mean that we need to spend our entire lives there, but it is important to honor it and recognize that, like, oh, there was a failure here. Something didn't work out. Something, monstrous was came from this, right? Or I have this monstrous feeling, which means how do I honor that? How do I like follow that path of failure into what is the right path for me? Right? When we hit a wall, it's not like, oh, this is the end, right? It's like, well, how do I adapt and change? And how do we allow for the monstrous to help us navigate the world with power, with elegance, with grace? And so, one last thought on the werewolves, and then I will move on, I promise. The antidote in much of the movies to a werewolf is a silver bullet, and silver is the metal of the moon. Right. So as the light of the moon catalyzes the transformation from the human into the instinctual animal self, silver, which is the refined metal of the moon, which carries that lunar signature here on planet Earth, becomes the antidote. So I think that's really interesting. This sort of unchained like lunar energy, but as it comes down to us and becomes more and more refined into silver, that becomes the antidote. So I think it is also about tuning into the animal self, right, and the desire and the instinct, but also how do we refine that? How do we refine that through our bodies, through our experiences, through our relationships, through our conversations, right? And so I don't know how long I've been going, but I've got a little bit more to say. Thanks for sticking with me, friends. Also, on Thursday, October the 17th, we are getting the full moon B plot, which is Venus in Scorpio sextiling Pluto in Capricorn. This is occurring at 29 degrees and 39 arc minutes. Capricorn having just stationed direct, I believe, last Friday. So, um, one of the things that I think about this sextile, and a sextile is our harmonious and communicative aspect, and we've sort of been talking about this throughout this broadcast, right? And I think this is like one of the subplots or B plots of this week, right? Venus's journey, in relation to Uranus and change, right? Neptune and love, right? And then Pluto in transformation, right? And these sort of like subterranean energies, these subterranean desires that are maybe starting to come to the surface with this full moon, with all of this tension, right? And I think this is really healthy. This is kind of churning the inner earth, right, and excavating some things. And so Venus, whose glyph is the symbol for woman, which you might remember from walking by a bathroom once, is also, the glyph can be seen as an image or a symbol for a mirror. Right? And relationship provides the mirror that reflects our behaviors and teaches us about our likes and dislikes and shows us how we show up in relation to others and the structure of or the container of a relationship, and also ultimately shows us about our values, right? Because Venus is, in my opinion, ultimately about our values. This is what I like and this is what I don't like, right? Pluto, all of that unconscious suppressed desire, right? Our shadow and our deep survival needs, that id energy that I was talking about. And so the relationship is the container that reflects our needs and desires as well as our fears. Right? And it is a space that we are vulnerable, right? And this is intimate partnership, but also like our friend relationships or any relationship. It is a container that reflects who we are and provides accountability. And it's like, I like when you do that, but I don't like when you do that. Right. And this helps give people information. Okay. Like you don't like it when I cut my nails on the subway. right? Or other people don't like it when I cut my nails on the subway. Huh, let me think about that, right? Or it can be like, no way, they're wrong, right? And, we get to choose what we do with that information, right? Whether we want to like project that out onto other people and make them the enemy and the villain, or whether we take that and internalize and develop how we interact in society based on the information that we were given. So again, a lot of what I see emerging is this, Aries, me, my animal needs, my desires, and also how, like, what is that like in relation to other people, right? And I think this is the Aries Libra axis, but this is happening in a different way. This is happening in a much more plutonic way, an under the surface way, a much more kind of visceral way, right? And I think this activates a lot of fears, right? Um, because it allows us to witness the deep fears that they can be processed in a container of a relationship or in the container of our body, right? And this might be like, oh, I have fears around my partnership, so I'm going to process that with my friends, right? Or in therapy, right? Or, in a group of people who have similar fears or needs, right? Um, and I think that coming through this full moon and rounding out the week, finding what is a mirror for you to be able to notice, okay, like this is coming up and how is that reflected? How is my behavior being reflected back to me? So that I'm not totally hijacked by these feelings of unprocessed desire or id energy, right? How do I have that reflected and have some accountability around that so I can learn from it? Because it's really hard to learn when we're just up in it, right? And we're just like running through the woods, right? Howling at the moon, not like knowing what we're doing, right? We need each other to hold us accountable, being like, hey, I noticed you were running through the woods barefoot and like, I'm worried about your feet, bro. Right? Maybe like get some slippers, something like that. Right. So it's not being like bad, shame, wrong, but being like, okay, as you're doing this, these are things to consider. This is how that impacted me, or, these are the fears that it brings up in me. So maybe we can talk about that. Right. Um, yeah, and I think the idea is to be aware of what is being reflected and finding ways of working with that information and allowing ourselves to grow and be transformed through what we are learning by the feedback we are receiving in the container of relationship, right? The container of our values. And this includes also the biofeedback that we're receiving from our own bodies and nervous systems, right? So this is not just our partners or friends or bosses being like, whoa, that was really messed up. This is also our internal feeling of being like, okay, my heart's racing, right? Or I'm sweating, or I'm lazy, I don't have any energy, or I'm depressed, I'm feeling bad, right? And being able to notice what is coming up this week, right? What is needing to be honored and expressed? And what are the ways that I can do that in that can be sort of give me some information about myself and my path, and without sort of barreling over everybody else, right? Or not paying attention to other people, or not paying attention to the feedback that I'm getting. Because I think the only real failure is doing something repeatedly and not learning the lesson. Remember, Chiron is the teacher, and I think failure is a great way of learning, right? So when something doesn't work, we can take a step back and be like, okay, what happened there? Right? I had this expectation. I like tried to do this thing. It didn't go as planned. What went wrong? Right? And what can I do better, or what can I do differently, which is maybe a better way of looking at that. And then last but not least, about 5 hours after Venus sextiles Pluto on Thursday, October the 17th, Venus will enter into Sagittarius. And so, just a heads up, Venus was in Scorpio from September the 22nd until October the 17th. And Venus will be in Sagittarius from the 17th all the way until November 11th. when they enter into Capricorn. So, just something to think about. Planets in Sagittarius are coming out of the depths of scorpionic intensity, and those planets tend to be like, oh, hell no, I am never going back there, full steam ahead. Right. So, all of this kind of like deep soul searching around desire and pleasure, right? Venus enters into the fire sign of Sagittarius, kind of shakes themselves off, and is like, that's the target, right? I'm going that way. So, just let your Venus run, right? And I think that the Venusian values, especially after this week, right, helping us to refine our values, sharpen our arrows, and kind of know what the target that we're shooting at is. And I think that can be really helpful. Right? And I think that the journey through the scorpionic underworld can help us to identify what feels good and what doesn't feel good and what we truly want. And this gives us a really good idea of which target to shoot our arrows at and which way to aim. Right. And also Sagittarius loves experience. So Venus might be like, oh, I want to do that, and I want to do that, and I want to do that. Right. So just heads up. But I think that Venusian energy gets a little bit lighter as they after they sextile Pluto and enter into Sagittarius. And yeah, Sagittarius is on the quest for truth, and so Venus and Sagittarius can be a lover of truth, which I think is great. What up, Moss? Nice to see you, my friend. So the other thing that I want to say is Pluto station direct, I believe, on Friday. This is Pluto's last stand in Capricorn, wrapping up the destruction that it has wrought through the cardinal Earth sign. Pluto entered into Capricorn in December. Sorry, I don't remember exactly. Anyway, Pluto entered into Capricorn in 2008 and has been chopping it up there ever since. And so one of the things, and I just wanted to bring this in. I touched on it last week, but I think it's important to reiterate because I've been talking to some people who are like, "Oh, everybody's telling me I need to remember what happened in 2008." Which, if you need to remember what happened in 2008, it was the financial crisis. Right? There's also a Hollywood writer's strike, but it's not about 2008, right? Pluto, it's not just about 2008. Pluto entered into Capricorn then and has been moving through Capricorn for the past 15 years. And then in January of this year, entered into Aquarius for a little while and then retrograded back and is now in the last degree, stationing direct, moving through the last or anaretic degree, which is the sort of, kind of ends of the end of the toothpaste tube of a sign. So this is the very ends of Capricorn. And so one of the things to think about, right, as Pluto is kind of dredging up the last kind of shadow material or the last unprocessed stuff from the dregs of Capricorn. One of the things that we can think about are what are the lessons that I've been learning since 2008? And yeah, this is a long time, right? This is 15 years. This is the lifespan of a teenager, right? This is half of somebody's life, right? The last 15 years have probably been pretty intense and formative and had a lot to do with the personal transformation of a lot of us, right? And we don't need to replay all of that, right? And it's not because of astrology, right? This is 15 years. A lot happens in that span of time. However, one of the things that if one were so inclined, one might want to do is look at, okay, what are some of the major life themes that I've been going through since 2008? What are the ups? What are the downs? What are the formidable relationships? What are the jobs? What are the, education that I've gotten? What are the successes? What are the things that didn't go according to plan, right? And just making a list of the major life events that you've gone through since 2008. And then you can step back and be like, okay, what are the through lines here? What are the themes? What are the sort of lessons that might have been coming through? What are the major life events and also the things that the universe might be trying to tell me, right? What is the clue that I'm trying to get here? And being able to notice that gives us a little bit of opportunity to be like, okay, from now until November, I think the 15th, when Pluto goes back into Aquarius, where it'll be for the next 20 years. All right. from now until then, it's sort of like dotting the I's, crossing the T's, wrapping everything up and being like, okay, what am I taking away? Right. If I can distill the last 15 years into a sentence, into a haiku, into a picture, into a diploma, into a lesson, right? What would that be? What would that look like for me? And I don't know. I don't know for me. And it looks like I'm getting some poor connection. So maybe I'll wrap. Oh, you're back. Okay. So yeah, just thinking about what that might be for you. Oh yeah, and also yeah, Pluto. Whimsy and Wild is saying I can't wait until it hits Aquarius because Pluto has been transiting the descendant, which is really painful, right? You know, and if you have sensitive points like the luminaries or any of the angles in a place that Pluto has been transiting, it is not fun, right? And you know, Pluto is a planet of transformation and change. It is death and rebirth and initiation. So one of my clients was like, "Oh, like so, Pluto makes us a probie, right? We become sort of when you are like pledging a gang, right, or a bike gang, you be like you wear a vest that like a probationary vest, right? And Pluto makes everybody a probie, right? We are being initiated into Pluto's gang in different ways depending on what house it is transiting, you know. And so for me, it's been going through my third house and will enter into my fourth house, which is, you know, a new kind of probationary like pledge experience. And, you know, we just got to be here for it. We got to surrender to it. But what we want to get before we go into this new change is like, what did I get from the last one? Because what we don't want is to just be stacking experiences on top of each other because then we're not like processing, we're not integrating, we're not getting the message. And I think it's really helpful to be like, oh, this is something that I learned, right? This is something that I can take with me. This is something that I learned about this area of my life that I was initiated into. So like you can wear your full Plutonian colors in that region of your life. Right. Instead of just being like, I don't know, that was weird. And then like going through it again in a different area of your life. So just something to remember. Right. Um, Oh, my friend Jade Brandt, who is on Instagram and also on TikTok, made this for me. Hold on, this is my new wizard attire. So yeah, maybe I'll add Jade in this because they are my wizard outfitter, and they made me this beautiful hoodie. So yeah, thanks Jade, and yeah, I'll add them in the notes to this video so you y'all can hit up Jade for your own wizard attire. Yeah, thank you so much. Anyway, that's all the astro weather that is fit to print, my friend. Sorry for being a little late and disjointed and not really knowing what day it is, but hey, I really appreciate y'all being here. Thanks for riding along with me through this week in space. I will post this to a YouTube as soon as I can find a charger for my computer. It's one of those weeks. Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, I'll get this on the YouTube. That's Camp Wizard Camp at YouTube. Like and share and subscribe, I guess, because that's what the kids do. That's what the kids say. That's what the YouTubers that I respect say. Also, a couple heads ups. If you want your astro weather in a more musical form, what's up, Laura? Thank you. If you want your astro weather in a much more musical and danceable form, I do a weekly astrology themed radio show called the Melee Report. That just dropped yesterday, I think. Anyway, I'll put a link in my stories again. You can check that out. It's on SoundCloud. You can get it on my Patreon, which is you look up Camp Wizard Camp at Patreon. I post it there first. And for the low, low price of $3 a month, you can have that delivered to your inbox each and every week. So you're never at a loss for good music to listen to or not knowing what's going down in space. And $3 a month is maybe the cheapest thing that you can buy. Anyway, I'm also doing a talk with the bad pastor Lindsay Turner on spirit possession and exorcism from a theological, psychological, and astrological lens. That'll be happening the 28th, 29th, 30th October, and then we're doing a roundtable discussion about astrology and spirit possession on the 4th of November. It's going to be a great time. I'm super excited about it. Exorcism is one of my secret. I secretly want to be an exorcist someday when I grow up. So, anyway, check that out. I'll put a link to that. There's a link in my bio, or you can check out The Bad Pastor on Instagram. Their work is great, by the way. So, if you want some more astrological content, check them out. Bad Pastor, follow them, like them. They're fantastic. And yeah, that's it. That's all I got. Thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being my friends, guys. And I wish you all a very happy, safe full moon in Aries. Let that animal come out, in productive, healthy, happy ways. Treat your animals right. All right. And until next time, my friends, yeah, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and may the force be with you. Bye now. How do I stop this? Thank you. Bye.